I'd like to dedicate the session to Stalin Anna and Gautami Akka, whose story together began with the song Olile Terivadu Devadaya from the movie Aragi. And I thought I could start it with a small song that I learned in school, where singing assemblies were a really big part of at least my time there.
Okay.
It's a song by Guru Nanak, so I'll just sing a few verses from that. And
Lovely, lovely, lovely. Music is always lovely.
सुमिरन कर ले मेरे मना, तेरी बीती जाती हूँ मरा, हरि नाम बिना, हरि नाम बिना, हरि नाम बिना, सुमिरन कर ले मेरे मना। कूप नीर बिनु धेनु क्षीर बिनु, कूप नीर बिनु धेनु क्षीर बिनु, धरती में है बिना, धरती में है बिना, जैसे तरुवर फल बिनहीना, जैसे तरुवर फल बिनहीना, जैसे प्राणी हरि नाम बिना, हरि नाम बिना, हरि नाम बिना, सुमिरन कर ले मेरे मना। काम क्रोध मद लोभ निराहो, काम क्रोध मद लोभ निहारो, छांद दे अब संत जना, छांद दे अब संत जना, कहे नानक शाह सुन भगवंता, कहे नानक शाह सुन भगवंता, या जग में नहीं कोई अपना, नहीं कोई अपना, नहीं कोई अपना, सुमिरन कर ले मेरे मना। So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. That was lovely. Nice way to start. Well, it's a bit odd to be looking into this hole. I hope you all are there. I was given the topic. Can you remind me what it is? Embracing different experiences or something to that effect. And the reason I chose that as a subject, because I do think that what I have learned in life, the different things that I have done, is really only through allowing myself and throwing myself literally in different experiences. Before I start, I just want to tell you that please, when it's about 25 minutes, will you just kind of signal me so I have a sense of time, because I might just, it's a stream of consciousness conversation. So just to get a sense of time, that'd be great if you can do that. So, as I was saying, that since I was a child, I just remember being very open to experiences, and I think that is where I have at least learned the most. And sometimes we don't recognize it, but it's a huge privilege just to be able to have different experiences. Of course, having said that, we all live in our little silos. Our experience is a drop in the ocean, but within that drop, when we sort of straddle different worlds, we allow ourselves to be touched by different things. All of them may not be pleasant. Sometimes it's difficult circumstances. Sometimes it's things that we don't want to learn, but we are forced into. But all of that, in retrospect, always seems far more fulfilling and seems totally worth it. My father is an artist. My mother a writer. My father came from a small town in Orissa, and my mother came from Bombay. She was a Gujarati, but from Bombay. And I grew up in Delhi throughout. I was born in Bombay, but since I was 6 months old, they moved to Delhi. So for me, every summer holidays, it used to be 1 month in this small town called Baripada in district Mayurbhanj, and 1 month in Bombay, just behind what used to be Metro Cinema, which still is Metro Cinema. there. So it was really going to this big city and going to this small town. And I'm so glad that my parents insisted that I spent equal time in both places, because that experience of being able to straddle these two worlds has just taught me so much. You know, whether it's sort of living a certain lifestyle to, taking, having baths close to a well and going to a pond and, going out to the loo. That time loos were not even in the house in that small village. We had to literally go in the middle of the night. You never went to pee. So from those experiences that I did, one of the most important experiences that I had was of street theatre. I don't know how many of you have heard of Sardar Hashmi, but he was a street theatre activist, a writer, a poet, and through him and my classmate Sudhanva, who now runs this organization, or this the group called Jannatya Manch, they brought me into that world, and I think that was a real eye opener. For many reasons, I do call it my political training, because while I grew up with art, and there was a lot of exposure to music, dance, poetry, exhibitions, the world of books, there wasn't enough politics that was discussed, or there wasn't enough understanding. Although luckily I'm very fortunate that both my parents were very secular, were very inclusive. So without knowing all the isms, in many ways there was all of that I experienced, without having to really sort of theoretically or learn it. It was just something that came from the heart. It was just a way of life for us, and I think that really helped in understanding some of it. So the street theatre days were great. If some of you are in college, and this is really the time to do different things. Of course, now we are in lockdown. We are stuck in our homes, which in itself is a luxury, as we know now. But to be able to try out different things, I think college is really, really the best time. So during my college, I would do Odissi dance. I would go and rehearse for my street play. I would learn a bit of music. And I used to be exhausted by the time I would hit the bed. But it was such good exhaustion that I slept much better then than probably I sleep now. So that was my big turning point of experience, of just being exposed to different realities that were not part of my reality. So for instance, going and doing a workers' rights play in a factory, or going to some office and performing a play about women, or about economics, or about education, about secularism. So it was those 4 or 5 years that I did that was hugely enriching. When I did my master's in social work, before that I took a year off and I was at Rishi Valley, a wonderful school in the south, started by J. Krishnamurti, a great philosopher and educator. So, that experience again enriched me. So, especially because there are a lot of young people, taking a year off is absolutely wonderful. In a way, half your year is going to be off anyways, thanks to this coronavirus. But how do we use this time also? I know it's tough to now experience things firsthand because we're all locked down. But even through that, it's of course on the net there is tons now. There is almost an overkill of things. But what is it that we can still, what are the kind of people are we listening to? What books are we reading? What thoughts are we absorbing? Because we really are, we become the person that we expose ourselves to. So it's a difficult one because there is such a clutter out there that it is what to choose and what to take and what not to take is really not an easy thing to sieve through. But we also have to be careful that we don't only remain in our echo chambers, because we tend to only search for things that we already know or that is already part of our world, our ecosystem. How do we expand that? That is always a big thing that we have to think about. That how do we, one second, please Asimania se chal ja to, हाँ दया करके. So it is really about how to use this time in the best way to further not just the mind but also to create empathies, to find our own talents. Are we good at writing? How do we listen? Are we good listeners? What is it that interests us, to expand our interest? I remember many years ago when I was in college, I used to tell young people that follow your heart, follow your passion and do what you really love to do. And one girl raised her hand and she said, "Ma'am, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I love doing." And I realized that I had taken that freedom that I had got in my upbringing for granted. And many a times our families, our schools, our society doesn't even allow us to do those, do different things or to have different experiences. So it's very, very difficult to be able to decide what you love to do. Even if you're given suddenly that freedom, you don't know what you really want to do. So, but it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, because till you don't try out different things, you're not going to know what to do. Until you don't know what to do, you are not going to be open to trying out different things. So it's complex, but the only way we can break that vicious cycle is probably by just trying out, by just throwing yourself into different circumstances. So, for instance, in my master's in social work, we had field work, which was twice a week, and then we would have block field work at the end of the 2-year course. But I decided to do a 2-month. Even after my first year, I felt like I needed an exposure beyond the city. So I went to a Gandhian organization close to Bardoli, in a place called Verchi and Valor. And there was an organization there where I worked with the tribals of that area. And it was a very Gandhian approach. It had a lot to do with environment and education and all of that. And I really learned a lot in those 2 months. And then at the end of my master's, for the block fieldwork, which was also officially I was supposed to do, I went to Orissa, because my mother is from Gujarat, father from Orissa. And having lived all my life in Delhi, I felt maybe an urge to also know a little bit about my roots. So I decided to again go to a tribal area called Phulbani, which is a district, a tribal district. And I thought I would be able to speak the language. And when I reached there, I realized that the Adivasis there didn't speak any Odia at all. They spoke a language called Kui, which barely had any similarities with the Odia that I knew, or any Odia for that matter. And that was a tough one, because the one in Gujarat was still far more comfortable, and it was in a small village, but it was still not something so out of my realm of imagination, or not imagination, I would say realm of experiences. But the one I went to Odisha for, I stayed in a school teacher's house, and there were lots of mosquitoes, and there was brain fever, so everybody would sort of get into their little mosquito nets by 5:36, and so you had to eat at 5. There was no electricity. We had to really walk far to bathe, or to go to there was no washroom really. You had to go to the jungles, and initially I was very inhibited going behind a tree. I would keep looking around, and it was tough being a city girl. And but that experience taught me so much. Every single day was a learning experience. We used to walk 10, 12, 15 kilometers to go to various villages, and I would go with this social worker who was working with an organization there, and I would learn from them and become part of it. And initially my parents were worried because I wasn't eating too much, and they were worried about the brain fever, and I absolutely didn't fall ill even one time. And those experiences for me, even after so many years, even after decades, I would say remain so precious. And in many ways that kind of informed me in terms of, oops, it says your session has ended. No, sorry, something popped up. You can hear me right? Can you hear me?
Yes. I'm able to hear you.
Okay, no, something came in between, so I was just wondering. So, so those experiences were very precious because I was out of my immediate reality. And I think that is what we need to sometimes throw ourselves in, to not worry about what will come out of it. What is it leading me to? What am I going to gain from it? The journey becomes the goal. And when you're just invested in the journey, you also have a more, it's a happier time, because you're just sort of figuring out, you're faltering, you're learning, you're enjoying, and without the care and without the worry of where it's going to take you. And yet it does take you closer and closer to where you actually want to go. And it's almost magical how that happens. But even now, if you ask me what's my profession, I wouldn't know, because I would really hesitate. I'm not a full-time actress, I'm not a full-time director, I'm not a full-time social advocate. I do a little bit of many things, including writing and speaking and all of that, but none of them are really professions. They have remained more of an interest. And I do think specialization is a little bit overrated. If you really know what you want to do and you're really driven by that genuinely, that's great, it's worth pursuing it. But sometimes we think we need to know where we want to head, and sometimes you don't, because you're still exploring. And why do you have to like only one thing when there are hundreds of different things to like, to do, to experience? This whole pressure of, at a very young age, young people get this pressure that what are you going to do? What are you going to become? What job are you going to take? And I think it's a tough one, because the pressure is from the peers, from our family, from everywhere. That pressure, that question really hangs. And it's really for us to kind of let go of that and say that, I want to love what I do and I want to do what I love. That it doesn't have to be hobby, and this doesn't have to be profession. Hobby is not the time to have fun, and your work doesn't have to be a drudgery. This whole idea of something co-curricular activity, hobby, these words have alienated us from the things we love the most. And it is absolutely possible to make what you really do love your own work, what you spend time in. A lot of the times people ask me, what do you do in your downtime? And I'm like, I don't know what a downtime is. I feel at some level I'm constantly working. But then if you enjoy your work, it doesn't seem like a chore. It seems like something that you like doing, and you're fully in it, and you're not thinking about the next step. And when you are in the moment, like a child is, you're happy. So I don't think one should worry too much about it. About 6 years ago now, time flies fast. In 2014, I went to Yale to do a 4-month fellowship. And when they wrote to me, so I said 4 months. I have a child who was at the time 4 years old. I can leave him behind for 4 months. And they said, well, you bring him along, and we'll give you a little apartment and you can stay there. He can be in a school. And it was an amazing experience, although the first 15 days were traumatic, because my child, who was in a play school with 3 hours that he used to go to, suddenly he was in a daycare for 8 hours. So he would hate it in the beginning, and he would bawl, and I would feel so guilty as a mother, and guilty as not doing all the work that my other fellows were doing. We were 16 of us from completely different parts of the world and different walks of life, from a Syrian activist to a presidential candidate in Iceland, to an amazing environmentalist, to a whole lot of people from, there were some people from South America, there were people from, Spain, there were people from Pakistan, it was such an amazing mix of people. And I couldn't sometimes get fully involved in it, because I also was having to take care of my child and cook, and abroad you don't have the same help that one gets here or that one is spoilt with. So it was really, really difficult. But after a few days, once I made peace with that situation, I actually started enjoying both aspects of it. And I realized my experience was about not just doing this fellowship, but doing this as a mother. Many of you will are not still at that stage, I'm assuming, because you're all young people. But it was a different kind of a juggle. And I think instead of cribbing about it, once you embrace an experience, it doesn't become a drudgery. I mean, when people ask me that, are you getting bored? It's been over 2 months. And I would say, no, why would I get bored? There's so much to do. There's so much to think, reflect, to find, to watch, to read. Why would you get bored? That's the last thing. I feel there is less time. And also, there are so many people out there who are suffering. We have seen enough images and stories. Today I was reading that there was a 13-year-old girl who was cycling some 1,200 kilometers, taking her father, and he was like a big man, carrying him pillion and riding all the way to her village. I mean, when you hear these heartbreaking stories, we feel, how can we complain about boredom? I mean, that would be really strange and would be a crazy contradiction of life, you know. So I really think that all of us can do so much if we embrace this experience, because I don't think this is going to happen for another 100 years. I hope not. And you know, how have we used this time? What have we filled this time with? Will in many ways also help us define ourselves going forward. Are we going to be the same people? What are the changes I'm going to bring about in my own self when I come out of this crisis, when I kind of go back to the world? Is it going to be business as usual? Are we going to be living the same life, abusing nature, you know, creating these huge gaps, economic gaps that we can now openly see, be apathetic to a lot of it? So there's much to reflect about. Coming back to other life experiences, so I've had many different things that I don't know how to do. For instance, when I did my first play, I don't even watch that many plays. I was like, I have no idea how to write a play and how to direct a play. And it's called Between the Lines. We in fact even shot it. If any of you have Hotstar, you can watch it. It's in what's called Cine Play. I coined the word because it's kind of cinema but a play, so it's shot in a theater, literally on stage with props and things like that, like you would see, but it's shot in a kind of a cinematic way. It's not just that you put 4 cameras and you just shoot it, but you actually shoot it like film. So that's why it's called Cine Play. So I wrote and directed that play for stage, and then it was shot later. When I did my first film, Firak, which was 2008, it was a difficult subject. It was about post-Gujarat riots that happened in 2002. I personally don't like to see violence, and strangely, both my films, Firak and Manto, are set during violent times. One just after the Gujarat Carnage, and one during partition. From 1946 to 50 is what I cover in Manto's life. If some of you don't know who Manto was, it's Saadat Hasan Manto, a great writer. He was an Urdu writer, controversial in his times, and then for a long time after that as well. I think finally we are giving him the due that he deserves. But he was always quite a favorite of the theatre walas and the literary circles. He wrote a lot about women, especially those, especially sex workers and those on the margins of society. He was really interested in what is happening to ordinary people, and you know, how do we grapple with different situations. He was very non-judgmental. He believed that the best of us, you know, have foibles, have warts and blemishes, and the worst of us can be redeemed. So he was always sort of dealing with grey areas of people. So it was quite a challenge to do that film, because I don't really come from an Urdu speaking family. It was about partition. A lot of it was just from the written word. How do you research? Of course, I went to Lahore and met his family, his daughters, his sister-in-law. They were all very, very helpful. But that whole journey of it took me 6 years from its inception to actually making it. Was an exhausting and challenging journey, but it was also an incredibly huge learning curve for me, and in every aspect, creatively, emotionally, spiritually, just taught me so much about life and people and places and everything. So I think if we go with fear, it stops us before we need to stop. Fear is a very dangerous emotion. It takes away our confidence. It doesn't allow us to think freely. It doesn't allow us to jump into things. It doesn't allow us to take risks. And when we don't take risks, we are always sort of towing the same path, and we are not trying out new things. And real joy comes when you try out new things and those moments of magic happen. So it's, you know, if you just do the tried and tested, then you almost know what the outcome is. It's not that much fun. So, I mean, it could go wrong. I mean, not everything that I've done is right. Not every decision I've made is right. Not every experience has been as fruitful as some others. So, but the fact that you plunge into them, if you do it without fear, it definitely helps. You go through it more easily at some level. You also bring out your own best, because you know, you're not scared just with the outcomes. You just keep focusing in the moment as to what best you need to do. both Firak and Manto are not the best films, and neither are they the worst films. They're somewhere in the middle, like we all are. We are all part of some big hierarchy. But if we don't keep looking up and down, we're just sort of traveling with many others. And it's just, maybe I'm being too philosophical about it, but I think that's how really I look at it. So those Firak and Manto, both films, I don't think I could have done had I had too much fear of, doing films, because I've never really assisted anybody. I've never gone to a film school. I'm not a very big, like a hugely film watcher. I do love watching good films, no doubt about it. But I'm still old school. I like watching it in theaters. I've seen lots in festivals when I used to travel or on long flights, but I'm still not getting used to that, taking your laptop and sitting and watching on platforms, which I'm slowly beginning to do, because there's so much content out there and so many wonderful films, both documentaries and feature and shorts, and there's a lot to watch. So yes, in these circumstances, to read and to watch, which is slightly removed from real life experiences, but they too are experiences of sorts, because you're able to watch yourself and what is your response to different things. And I think that's how we know we are changing. In many ways, I'm the same person I was even probably 20 years ago, when I was your age, or many of your ages. But I know that I'm still not that same person, and the only reason I know it is because how I respond to the same things that I know I'm responding to them differently as from the time that I would have responded maybe 20 years ago. That's what tells me that maybe I've grown a little. It's not always in the best direction. Sometimes you can regress as well. But it's only through your responses that you learn about yourself. So I think the outward and the inward journey has to happen simultaneously. And you guys are young, many of you, I believe this is mainly for young people. So you will be at many crossroads soon as to what to do in life and what to take. And everyone will push you in one direction. Your heart might tell you to do something else, or you might be just confused about what to do. And I think it's okay to be confused. It's better to be confused and then slowly find your path than to be too confident about things that may not even be right. So I'm going to stop here, because it's nicer to be able to respond to what you have to ask and what you are thinking about, and you may agree, disagree with me, and we could maybe take some questions. So how's
Sure.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions.
Okay. Why aren't there many women directors in Indian cine industry? Well, because for the obvious reason. I mean, it's not just film industry, it's so many professions. If we see there aren't enough women, and that's a question we should all be asking and changing the answer for it, because there has been sort of a natural exclusion. For the longest time, I sometimes talk to my son about it, and he's 9.5, and he just doesn't understand it, and he just says, I don't understand, like, why is it even the case? Like, why do people even behave differently with men and women? Why are there less women directors? Why are there less women scientists? Why are there less women economists? Everything. Why are there less of women other than in the caregiving industries, which is whether it's being nurses or being teachers, in those kinds of things, there are more women. But otherwise, even as 9-year-old child understands it better. So I have no idea why this is carried on. Why have we succumbed to this patriarchal system? And the film industry is no exception. It has largely been a male industry. But I can tell you, in 10 years, you will see a lot more women than what we saw, let's say, 10 years ago. Because many more women are in film schools. The population of women students has really increased. A lot more women are not just being assistants. Always they've been a little more assistant as women, because they're known to be more organized, they can multitask. A lot of even the male filmmakers and producers like women assistants, but they don't really rise in their particular departments, and you won't see that many heads of departments. But now you will gradually start seeing them. because I think more and more women are now participating and telling their stories. We definitely need that diversity to be able to hear different stories from different perspectives. And just as there is a male gaze, sometimes you see a film and you say, oh, this must be made by a man. I'm sure there's something called the female gaze, and we need to see that too. It may not be a conscious thing. When I'm working, I'm not thinking that, oh, I'm a woman, and constantly that's not weighing on me, or I'm not too aware of it. But the fact I'm a woman and the experiences I've had as a woman must inform some of my choices. So yeah, so hopefully that you will see much more change soon.
So, ma'am, we have questions coming from various sources. So maybe I'll just read them out.
Yeah, please, why don't
And
you just select some and
yeah, definitely. Mm, so, as seekers of change, we're constantly putting up a mirror to society to portray what is, as well as speaking about what has been and what should or could be. So, can you speak a little bit about the relevance of this and how it has manifested in your life and work as an actress, director, social worker?
You mean how I see my work as a mirror to society, or Manto sees actually his stories as a mirror to society? So are you talking about art and literature being a mirror to society? Is that the
Both
question?
through your work as an artist in various mediums as well as a social worker and in life in
Right.
general.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be. There are enough people who also believe that art can be for art's sake, and that is one perspective. And I'm not, each one to their own. If I want my freedom, I have to respect everyone else's freedom too. I can't just want mine. But for me, art has remained a means to an end. It is not an end in itself. So I'm much more driven by what I want to say, what I want to show, what I want to tell, what I want to share. And there are enough things that trouble me, that enough dilemmas, enough concerns, which doesn't mean you can't do it in a funny way, or you can't do it in a, there can be a romantic film, or there can be a thriller, whatever the genre may be. But for me, what I want to say is what drives it. So whether it was in Firaq, whether it was in Manto, even doing Manto was not only to celebrate this great writer, of course, but it was also because I felt, and it was in fact primarily because I wanted to respond to what is happening today. And today, when I say, it was 2012 when I started, but it took, I think Manto's relevance has only grown since then. But because I felt like if I did anything about today, it might become too didactic, I chose to talk about something that happened 70 years ago. But people are able to see the parallels immediately with what's happening today. So it was more to respond to that through a historical figure. So Ambad is Mantu also always. He always said that मेरे अफसाने एक आईना है. अगर किसी बुरी सूरत वाले को अपने शक्ल से ही नफरत हो जाए, तो that's not my fault. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, मैं भी थोड़ा सा भूल गई हूँ. तो उसमें मेरा क्या कसूर? Something to that effect he says, which means that my stories are a mirror to society, and if you don't like what you see in it, that's not my fault. And so the mirror will show the good and the ugly and the beautiful, and reality is a mix of everything. And he was a big champion of wanting to show that reality, and I try to do that too, through my work, through our conversations, through what I write, through what I make. Yeah, and because film doesn't create a revolution in any case. What can a film do? It can just trigger a conversation, it can create empathy, it can make you ask questions. Finally it can only show you yourself. You see yourself in some characters, you see an emotion, you see a decision, you see a word, and you think about it subconsciously. And that's why cinema is so powerful, because it does go into your subconscious. And that's why films are banned and films are censored, because people who are conservative and orthodox, they know that the importance of art, otherwise they wouldn't ban it. What can a 2-hour film do after all? But they know that it goes into your subconscious and can actually change how you feel and think.
Entertainment, as part of learning for children, how do we keep them engaged in a manner that is as much self-reflective as it is empathetic to the world around them? And connected to that, you pointed out that children's films are a very small percentage of the number of films that come out. And so why do you think that is, and how do you think it could improve?
Yeah, children's film, because we are a poorer country, we usually in homes also there is usually one television. Going out to a theater is an expensive thing now. It's not that, I mean, now of course no, but what I mean is that in general it is an expensive form of entertainment. So what happens that people try to make what we call general entertainment, which means literally 6 to 60 to get a U certificate. Now, how can a film be appropriate for a 6-year-old child, which is also appropriate for a 60 and a 40 and a 20 and all of that? So while an older person can see something that might seem childish, for a child to be subjected to the more grown-up stuff may not be the best thing. And when I was the chairperson of the Children's Film Society, we looked at many of the films at that time, even the mainstream films, and were shocked how detrimental, in fact, they are to children. And when we have our televisions on, I don't have a television now for 4 years by choice. I just don't have a TV, so we don't miss it at all, neither me, my son. But there is so much of bombardment of all kinds of content that we don't know what we're really watching. And we definitely need more focused children's film. But because sometimes it's not seen as a lucrative thing, in many different countries, it's the government that really supports these kind of initiatives. But even CFSI is unfortunately, it's a 55-year-old or now maybe even more, probably 60-year-old organization, and since 1955, so you can calculate that. And yet it doesn't, it has a bank of films, but nothing new is really coming out of there because people, they don't want to put in enough money. We don't think, everything is driven so much by economics as opposed to what is really good for people or good for our children.
Can you speak a little bit about your mother, Varsha Das? She comes from a Gandhian family, and also, is there an influence of Gandhi in your work, the way you approach it?
Yeah, so both my grandparents were very closely in the freedom struggle with Gandhi. So, in fact, my grandmother was with Kasturba Gandhi in the jail, and at that time, when Gandhiji used to write letters from South Africa and they were marked in English, and my grandmother, I believe, used to read out because she had done her graduation in English. She was one of the first ones in her community. And my great grandfather was in fact Gandhiji's right hand person in Saurashtra, and he was asked to start a newspaper, and which still is there in Gujarat and in Bombay, what we call Janmabhoomi. And so for me, my bedtime stories during my summer vacation that I mentioned that were in Bombay were Gandhiji stories. In fact, we had lots of letters that he had written to my grandparents. My mother has donated them all to various museums, to the Gandhi Museum. She was also the director of the National Gandhi Museum after she retired from National Book Trust. And I'm that way very fortunate that both my parents are very sort of high integrity, upright people who really have never worked for money and the usual things. And I'm grateful for those values that they have instilled in us. Especially my mother has a very deep sense of discipline, and my father doesn't. So I'm glad that some of that discipline has come into me, not all of it. But they both are such workaholics that even during the lockdown, when I asked them if they are doing okay, and they live separately for years now. So when I ask them both, and they're by themselves, and I worry from here, and they're like, yeah, we're cooking and cleaning and working and writing, and my father is painting away, my mother is writing away. So, and they are both in their late 70s. One is 78, one is 79, and so yeah, I'm grateful for that kind of energy that they instill. So Gandhiji's influence in some ways, I think, definitely has been there, more subconscious probably. But this whole thing of being non-violent, not sort of justifying violence. Justifying violence. It's like whatever the means be, if your end is right, it's fine. a lot of our stories are about good and good versus evil. I mean, when I teach my child also, we're reading stories so much. There is so much violence in films and books that justify violence for the right end. And maybe it's the Gandhian side in me that kind of feels uncomfortable about that. That, is that an excuse to just be violent? A lot of our films normalize violence, they glamorize violence, and I think I'm very uncomfortable with that. Also, Satyagraha, which was a Gandhian philosophy that he gave a name to, the Satya ka Agraha, which means in pursuit of truth. And I think that also is a good value to hold close to our heart. We are not always 100% truthful, or we make small excuses, or we find different, we say white lies, but it's definitely something worth pursuing. So yeah, I am kind of influenced by him. But the idea of Gandhi should not be to just put him on a pedestal and think of him as that there can be no wrong. Like all of us, Gandhi was also flawed, and he had his issues. But the fact that he managed to rally the whole country, around his ideals, and actually helped in getting the British out in a non-violent way, he definitely has inspired many, many people, not just in India but around the world.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences traveling with your father, see his art, and for example, meeting P.V. Doshi and his artwork at the Parliament building?
So yeah, my father, for those of you who don't know, is an artist, and he studied. He was in Odisha at 17. He literally ran off from his house and came to Bombay and studied at the JJ School of Art, and was a gold medalist. And then he remembers those days as more like 300 sketches a day. No money to take a train. He would fall asleep in a train and didn't have money to come back. So, but yeah, I mean, he's not just a painter. I think of him more as a more rounded artist. He's been wanting to set up an art center in Orissa, what he calls his JD Center of Art, and it's a very unique art center because it houses traditional, folk, contemporary, tribal, modern art all under one roof, because he's always felt that modern art gets a lot of name and value and everyone knows the names of the artists, but our crafts community, they are just sort of nameless, faceless people. We enjoy their things, whether it's a hearth pankha, whether it's a woven garment, or whether it's a basketry, whether it's a metal craft, whatever it may be, but they are not only not recognized, a lot of it is just dying. They are sort of literally getting obsolete because nobody is preserving and conserving them enough. It's not part of our daily lives. So he's very deeply concerned, and we're trying to raise funds. And if any of you want to come and volunteer there or intern there for a while, if you're interested in art, or you can help out with the website or with graphics or with conservation. We could always use passion and some more hands to work on it. It's really a passion project for all of us to try and set up this center. So he definitely has taught me some of my core values. I would say definitely come from him, and which is really a sense of deep commitment and passion in what you do. And luckily both my parents have always done things not just for themselves, but have always embraced many more people and situations, and I'm glad that they have given me and my brother that in our genes.
Could you speak a little bit about your experiences and few words about Mrinalda?
Yes, of course. Mrinal Sen, was one of our greatest filmmakers. He was really part of the three masters, Satyajit Ray, Ritwik Ghatak and Mrinal Sen. And he passed away a couple of years ago. I was very, very close to him. I did his last film called Amar Bhuvan. Unfortunately, that film didn't even release. It probably did a couple of days maybe in Kolkata. It was at the Kolkata Film Festival. I went with him to Cairo, where we both got awards. But after that, it just kind of vanished. Now there's a bad DVD copy of it. His son Kunal Sen. He's really trying to find, and I'm also trying to find the actual film, because we need to preserve films of these great masters for posterity. I mean, you all should be watching it. It's such a simple, sweet story of in a village, and sometimes these simple stories, well told, are the ones that really remain. He was for him also, his work was really a mirror to society. He was also so driven by what he cared for and the people he cared for. All his stories reflect realities. Um, they are very strong. He did films in Bengali and in Hindi, and he was such a man of the heart, and he spoke as he thought. He's very Manto-esque in some ways. I used to always tell him that you're very Manto-esque. I showed him a few footage. Unfortunately, he couldn't see the film. But he also wore white kurta pajama and black rimmed glasses, and I would say, Mrinalda, your similarity doesn't end there. He and his wife, who was a wonderful actress and such an amazing partner to him, and they will always remain very precious to me.
So quite a few questions about your interactions with various people, various artists. And so this one is about Raghu Rai, if you could say a few words.
Yeah, so Raghu Rai is my father's closest friend, so I've seen him from the time I was born. And he is, they are very similar and they are very different. They also have their studios just one floor apart. They talk very often, and so I've kind of grown up with him. I remember going to his dark rooms and seeing how, and he used to be quite messy. His photographs used to be all over, and I had to tell him, how do you even find anything here? But he used to always find what he needed to. Now, because of the digital medium, sometimes he doesn't even look through the lens. He just takes photographs like that. And I so often tell him, I said, you take photographs and you never share them with me. So, I have many photographs, of course, taken by him. But the kind of spontaneity that he brought to his photographs was really amazing. And I think that exposure that I had as a child, when you're not conscious of names, I mean, it's not because he's an eminent photographer, but for the person he was and for the affection that he gave to me and my brother as well, and for his art. We just grew up with musicians and dancers and photographers, and all of them just coming into our homes, and we going to their place and sleeping off, because my father, let's say, would stay longer, and then next day we had school. So I remember just sleeping with all of the noise around me, and I would just sort of fall asleep in their house, in their couch. And now his daughter is a photographer too, Avni, who's like my little sister, and he has two daughters, Purvai and Avni. Both are very, very, Purvai is an artist. So I think when you grow up with that freedom to try out things, the children definitely benefit, and I can see that in children and many artists. So I think to keep, I mean, you can be a chartered accountant, you can be an architect, you can be a banker, whatever. To have some connection with the arts is not to become that, but just to find that kind of an expression, to be able to, because art is really for the soul, and we've sometimes thought that it's a very elitist thing. It's nothing. There's nothing elitist about it. Otherwise, the cave men and women wouldn't have drawn on their caves. Otherwise, the tribals wouldn't very carefully make those little jewelry or weave their little hats and baskets. And why do we bring in art? In fact, it's a very primal emotion to want to express, to see something that's beautiful, to also share that expression. So yeah, so Raghu Rai is somebody who's also very, very close to me.
There's a question from a student who's soon to take up a profession. So they say, taking up a profession that I'm interested in, but now my drive towards it is waning. I find it challenging to take a leap and try something else, because I don't know whether it will work out or not. And given the freedom in the beginning to try, now I feel like I shouldn't change my path.
I don't know whether you were there in the beginning when I talked about exactly this, that don't have that fear. At the most, what will happen? You'll fail for a bit, you will come out of that, and you will learn from that. There is also equal amount of chance that you may not. You may actually love doing it. You may be, and what you love doing, you automatically are good at it because you're putting your heart and soul into it. So it automatically becomes actually better. And so I would say that if you're really not liking what you do, anyway, it's a good time to rethink that. Whether it is what else that you have thought of, or whether it's something else. The fact you're not liking what you do, that in itself should be something to think about, something to worry about, something to take an exit from. Because you don't want to spend the rest of your life doing something that you don't like, and then much later you would say, oh, I wasted 20 years. I had that thought that I should have tried something else and I didn't. So I would always encourage plunging into different things. Of course, we all have our different realities, and some people might think that, oh, I'm very privileged. I'm definitely more privileged than many, but there are many more who are even more privileged than me. And in fact, a lot of my well-wishers and friends used to say that, oh, you could have earned so much had you gone to Bombay at the right time. Why don't you do commercial films? There's so much more money. Even what you want to say and do, it will reach more people if you were more marketable. So there is always more to do. But if you want to compromise and do things that are not going to fulfill your heart, then it's no point doing. So keep your needs low. If you have less needs, then you also have to earn less. And when you have to earn less, you can experiment more. You can falter more. You don't have the pressure of, wanting more. So that definitely I keep that as a mantra, to just have less things.
Your campaigns in the fight against colorism are very inspiring. Sometimes, due to subliminal conditioning at a young age, I still resent my skin color at 20. How do you transcend this internalized self hate which exists despite the fact that society today is a lot more kinder, mature, and respectful?
Yes, society is, but if you see the product, they don't seem to be decreasing. That means there are enough people still using them. There are enough matrimonial ads that want fair and lovely and convent educated, homely convent educated, or whatever. So I think this is a very deep bias that has remained, this obsession with fair skin. Even though my parents didn't put any complex in me, there were people around who would invariably talk about it. Even in the film industry, if I would do a role of a lower caste, lower class, village woman, slum woman, then it was fine. But the minute I did a film where, let's say, the character was so many birds chirping, parrots. If I did a character of upper middle class, an educated or an affluent, they would come and say, "Can you lighter your skin, please?" Because the character demands. And I would say, "What does that mean? You want to stereotype that all upper class or all educated people are supposed to be light skinned, which is not even true. In a country where the skin color is 80% like this, you want to make me feel I'm not good enough." And everything around us is telling us that. It's the hoardings, the films, the television, advertising, magazines. Everyone's trying to tell us, because we are not being represented anywhere. We have been given this stereotype, information about what is beauty, and we are all trying to fit into that. And we really don't need to. We really have to learn to be comfortable in our skin, literally and otherwise. Even during the lockdown, like I see sometimes in webinars, and everyone's kind of blow dried their hair, and sometimes people tell me, "Oh, you just dye your hair," and you don't you think it's important to also look like an actor or look like a director? And I'm like, I don't want to act like one. So there are pressures, of course, in this field even more. But I would just say that the minute you start defining yourself with your talent, with your interest, with your other things, you will see it will recede in how you identify yourself and how others also identify you. So I think that you have to work on yourself, of not letting anyone think of you as any less. Because a lot of the times we ourselves create those blocks, thinking that, no, I will not be accepted in this, so let me not even try, and we stop trying. And that's going to be terrible, because if you don't even try, then that's a perfect recipe for any failure anyway. You have to keep doing different things that you like. So don't define yourself with the color of your skin. That's the lowest definition anyway.
So one of the questions we ask everyone who's part of the session is if you could recommend 5 books and 5 films, documentaries, talks,
Ooh.
especially to the younger
I don't
generation.
have them on top of my head because I, to be honest, hardly read anything these days. Between my work and my child and all the social advocacy and all these webinars, there's too much of this. That's why I'm always hesitant to say yes. I'm not reading too much. As one of you have asked about Safdar Hashmi and what book would I recommend. So in that, there is a book called Halla Bol, which is written by Sudhanva, who was the person I was mentioning, who was my classmate and also then is now leading Jan Natya Manch. He was a close associate also of Safdar. So that's a very interesting book. I've got some of the books for women. There is a interesting book. Give me a second. I'm going to just get some of these things that I've been at least wanting to read, if not read.
Sure.
So there is this book called, I'll tell you what's on top of my um file. There are some old, some new. There are various others, but this is just on the top that I have of my bookshelf. Mm, there's a very interesting book about this Dalit writer who sort of went abroad and I don't know, sorry if you can see. It's called Ants Among Elephants, an Untouchable Family and the Making of Modern India. It's a bit serious. This is Halla Bol. It's a wonderful read by Suthanva on Safdar Hashmi, but not just on Safdar Hashmi, on the whole movement of street theatre and what it does and what was his life, but after his death, after his killing, really, not death. Jasoda is an interesting novel by Kiran Nagarkar for women and men. Narratives of Violence Against Women in India by Kalpana Sharma, The Silence and the Storm. I do tend to see more non-fiction, but I'm sure there's wonderful fiction also that comes out. In terms of documentary, my God, there is so much. In fact, I just saw something again which is around women. I will try and find it. There's Fire in the Blood about the whole pharmaceutical industry and how they, driven by their profits, how they almost did not make medicines accessible to for AIDS, HIV/AIDS. So that's a interesting documentary. There's so many. I don't want to name them because I'm sure there are more that you guys would know than I would, because I don't even see that many. Maybe I will put it on. Is there a way that I can put some names later? Maybe.
Sure, you could share them with us and we can.
Yeah, if I could, yeah, because I saw some 3 very interesting documentaries that somebody had shared with me, and I looked at it and I thought, oh, I should definitely watch these. I still haven't, but Heart of Gold, the U.S. gymnast scandal, these are all about women abuse as well. But there are so many other interesting documentaries that people are doing now on these platforms like Amazon and Netflix. There are tons of very interesting. There's an interesting documentary called Losers about people who didn't make it big, but they are telling their story and why they felt they lost out. So there are many. There's a very interesting Iraqi film I saw long back called Turtles Can Fly. It's a fiction film, but it's a nice film. There are many interesting Iranian films and German films. Now with these OTT platforms, we can also watch films from other parts of the world. There's a film called Talk to Her by Almodovar, if you haven't seen that. And there is Pain and Glory by Almodovar, his latest film. I don't know whether it's on any OTT platform. There is Javier Bardem's Beautiful, which is a very heart-wrenching film, but a very nice one.
So we've come to the end of the session. I'd like to thank you again for being us today, and also thank you to Vihan for sharing his time with his mom. And
thank you. Yes, but I do hope. I just want to say that I hope all of you will, push your boundaries, will not succumb to pressure. There will always be pressures. There will always be pressures for you to do one thing and not the other thing, for you to be silenced, for you to not ask questions. And also the social media space, while you may think you have lots of friends, can be quite superficial. So I urge you to also make real friends where you can be vulnerable, where you can ask, no question is stupid, you can just ask what you want, and you will find some answers. And the more you experience life, the more answers you will find to it. And there is no one answer to anything anyway. So it's really about allowing yourself this journey.
Thank you. This is something we tell everybody at the end of the session, which is to definitely write about it, preferably as soon as this session gets over, because that's when it's still fresh in your mind, and do share it like on social media or with your friends, with your family.
Share it with me as well on my handles on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm a bit of a hesitant social media user, I have to admit, so I don't see that much. But I would love to know what you feel, and at any point, if you want to do some work, if you're a film student, if you're doing graphics, if you're doing website, don't forget my offer to come and help us with JDCA. You can also look at their Facebook, jdcenterofart.org. So yeah, because there is so much about art and cinema and poetry and all of that is out there that we can embrace.
I'd also just like to thank Vishwanath of Kari Details, because he got us in touch. So
Yes,
this has been a really wonderful session.
with Vish, and he told me about it. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks.